Okay, just a real quick note to this part. The part one didn't give it away. I'm breaking this up into at least 3, maybe 4, but I think just 3 different parts. I'll try and label which each part of what each part covers, so that people don't have to watch the entire thing. It's at 2 hours right now. The third part might be another 30 minutes to an hour. I really hope it's less, because you don't want to listen to it, and I'm frickin' tired. So, but yeah, that was that announcement. Now, it'll be as if I didn't know I was making this announcement in a moment as you move on to part 1 of the video. Yeah. Okay. Hey gang, hi. There's mess behind me. Don't judge. I'm in the middle of cleaning stuff up. But I won't have much time this weekend, and this is a video on the urban politics and race thing we're doing. I wanted to go and get this out sooner rather than later, so it's there. There will be a couple times during the video where I do the "I'll be right back" thing, and then I run to like do something, like I have food in the oven, and then I come back, but you won't know the difference except for a choppy cut. It'll be instantaneous to you, but I'm not gonna like put in smooth transitions and stuff. So anyway, okay, urban politics. There are some things that I will go over. Some concepts I think are pretty simple and are very well laid out in the book. Are kind of straightforward, and I'll expect you to sort of know them, but ask a question if you don't. Okay, so urban politics. We're doing a kind of combo: urban politics, racial politics, because especially over the past 100 years, there's been a lot of overlap there. But first we'll talk about what the government structure looks like, what the different power players are in an urban political system, what's the political theory behind how things work, things like that. So we talked about, this is key, the constitutional place of cities. The United States Constitution talks about the federal government and state governments. It makes no mention of cities, counties, towns. I'm rolling over something. Cities, counties, towns, villages, etc. So those things in America don't actually have a right to exist. They exist at the pleasure of the state, and the state could theoretically eliminate all cities and towns within it if it wanted to. It wouldn't be the best idea in the world, but they could do it. We can see a little bit, or some kind of example of that with the Newark school system being controlled by the state of New Jersey for the past 20 years. Michigan's taken over Detroit and run that, sort of, fired the elected leaders of Detroit, established its own, I don't want to say its own ruler, established a manager of Detroit to help it through bankruptcy, maybe, well, you might want to say it. Anyway, state can take over a municipality. It's rare. It does happen. Excuse me. Cities are formed within states based upon what are known as municipal charters. Municipal comes from municipality. It's local area. If you talk about a municipal government, you're likely talking about a a local government or a county government. So it's a city charter or a county charter. The municipal charters explain the role of the municipality, whatever it's a city, village, town, etc. What powers it has, what powers it doesn't have, what it can do, things like that. Not all cities are created equally. Some cities will have very limited municipal charters, meaning they'll have very limited powers. Others may have very broad powers and have a lot of discretion as to what they can do. Even cities within the same state can have different degrees of control or power, depending upon sort of what that city, when it wants to become a city, applies for, what it wants to do, what state decides it wants to let that city do. How does something become a city? It's a good question you asked. So people within the governance structure, how does something become a city? We have a bunch of people living together on some land. Right now, that land is what we would call unincorporated. All right, it's not a city. It's maybe within a county, but it's unincorporated within the county, meaning people live there, but they don't live within a city. They don't have any sort of more local city type government structure. When the people though can get together and say, let's become a city. So they get together, file a petition or a charter with the state to incorporate a certain geographic region and become a city. So when an unincorporated area becomes incorporated, that means it's gone from being people living there with no government structure to some sort of like city, town, village government structure. Often they'll do like elections for city council and have like a police force and stuff. But if you drive through, I think I remember when I went out west when I was like much younger. It was a lot. I feel like I remember seeing lots of signs that said now entering Terryville unincorporated, or the unincorporated township of Terryville. Just means it hasn't done anything to keep itself distinct. Incorporation is important for a municipality, for a city, for a municipality, because it defines the boundaries of that municipality. It creates that government structure, and it can protect, quote unquote, or insulate that municipality from other municipalities around it. So Greensboro is a growing city. Not only is it growing in population, but as people push out farther and farther, Greensboro goes around and into the unincorporated areas around it and will incorporate that land into Greensboro. However, if there's a group of citizens that live outside of Greensboro, currently an unincorporated area, and they don't want to be a part of Greensboro, they can resist incorporation into Greensboro, annexation by Greensboro, by incorporating themselves into a separate city or township or, some type of independent government structure that can't be incorporated by the city of Greensboro. I stick on this for a little bit because it's becomes very important for our story later on. But hint preview thing. This annexation, there's this tension between home rule, which is this idea that smaller and smaller even groups of people can come together and decide how they want to create their own city, versus having a larger city annex a large area to create a larger city. So think of home rule as, well, we'll see an example of it. What slide is it? We'll talk about St. Louis. Slide 32 and slide 33. So St. Louis is a good sized metropolitan area. Think of it as being a really big city and stuff. If you actually look, though, at the political makeup of St. Louis, there's the city of St. Louis, which makes up a decent chunk of their area geographically, but it doesn't make up even anywhere close to the majority of the geographic area of what we would think of as St. Louis. If you look at map 33, you'll see the city of St. Louis along the river, and then you'll see a bunch of, outside of St. Louis, a bunch of little like purple, red, green, yellow colors. Those are all separate, small cities, suburbs that have incorporated to prevent St. Louis from annexing them, so they can create their own rules, their own neighborhood ordinances even. We'll talk about some of those too. But yeah, look at that. It's one of the most fragmented, if not the most fragmented city in the nation. I have the 32 Google Maps view of it, and there's an outline of what St. Louis, the city limits of St. Louis are, but when you see it on the satellite there, you can see that you wouldn't think of St. Louis as maybe just being confined to that one area, but the city is responsible for. But St. Louis County has 91 different municipal governments in it. Not one, not two, not three, but it has 91 different governments dividing power between even, very small pieces of land, which leads to what some people would say are some issues. However, people who support what mentioned as the home rule movement will say that's a good thing, because even if there are 91 governments in St. Louis County, and some of them maybe only have 200 people in them, those 200 people decided they wanted to be their own municipality. They didn't want to have anything to do with St. Louis or any other region, so they decided to, the argument would go, exercise their freedom to decide how they wanted to be ruled. They wanted to be controlled, what government structure they wanted to have, and so they voted for a very small, limited, a government limited in sort of scope and authority, perhaps, but wasn't part of St. Louis, and maybe still had to play by some broader rules, but would have some independence. We'll talk a little more. We'll talk about that. Anyway, so we have this tension or this issue between annexation, so cities that are able to annex, that have very liberal, and I use liberal in the very permissive sense, annexation rules, where they can sort of gobble up the areas around them, and the citizens that live in the unincorporated areas don't have much of an opportunity to incorporate into a municipality, or the big city can override the incorporation of another city, generally, with the state's blessing or according to some sort of due process and rules and stuff. But there can be that great power given to them. So you have the annexation with the large but single government cities, so everything's kind of unified, versus this metropolitan balkanization. Metropolitan, big region, city, the Atlanta metropolitan area, New York metropolitan area. It's the city plus all the areas surrounding the city that are very much economically, socially connected to that city. Greensboro, High Point would be one metropolitan area. As a matter of fact, Greensboro, High Point, Kernersville, Burlington, Winston-Salem, Jamestown, that's all sort of one metropolitan area, a little broader geographically than and less populated than some of the other ones we would think of. But so metropolitan, and then balkanization is a word used to describe things being divided up into little tiny pieces. And sometimes, often, those dividing lines are restrictive. So metropolitan balkanization, a metropolitan region, an economically distinct area that's all economically connected in some way. For example, St. Louis County, what we think of as St. Louis. However, it's been balkanized, meaning the area we think of St. Louis has been divided up into 91 different governments. So instead of there being one government through annexation, we have 91 different governments because of home rule, what's also can be called as metropolitan balkanization, and that can create some problems, which we'll talk about. I have on here 3 main structures of city government: weak mayor system, strong mayor system, and the council manager. We will generally refer to it as the city manager system of government. I think that's pretty straightforward. I have benefits and drawbacks on here, a description of what it is. It's in the urban politics reading, pretty straightforward. I'm not going to spend much, if any, time on that. Those 3. Have questions, feel free to ask me, but there's reading there for a reason, and there'll be some questions or something on the exam about that, and hopefully you've read it or you've asked me about it. You'll see it on the study guide too. So I'll be right back. You won't notice necessarily that I'm gone, but a moment. Okay, I'm back. Couple second pause there to get reoriented. I was talking about the 3 types of government, saying look them up: strong mayor, weak mayor, and the city manager form of government. There's one I want to hit on very quickly, and it'll come into play later as in an example. There are other quasi-governmental organizations and other sort of private power centers, private entities that hold considerable sway, can make decisions, things like that. Action Greensboro would probably be considered one of those quasi-governmental organizations. But lots of times these organizations are appointed or given power by the city council to act on its behalf. This isn't the greatest analogy, but it's similar enough. Before the 17th, 18th, 20th Amendment, something like that. Before one of those amendments in the progressive era, we did not directly elect our senators. Direct election of senators. We did not, 17th Amendment. Okay, before the 17th Amendment, we did not directly elect the senators that served in the United States Senate. Today, me and you and everybody, we go to the polls and we will vote for Kay Hagan, or we will vote for Richard Burr directly, and then if they get the most votes of us, they will go to the Senate. What would happen before this would be we would vote for our state legislature. So we would vote for Marcus Brandon or Pricey Harrison or Trudy Wade or Tom Tillis or other people who are in the state legislature. Now, those members of the state legislature, they would then get together and they would be the ones that voted or selected the senator from the state. So in that way, the populace choosing the senator was a couple steps removed, or the populace was a couple steps removed from choosing a senator. Founders did that on purpose because they didn't want a lot of democracy in America. They wanted to be protected from majority opinion and for elites to be in control of things. So by providing an indirect election of senators, by having the common people vote for the state legislature, who are the elites of the common people, then having those elites vote for perhaps higher elites to be in the Senate, then hooray, rich people are on top. Anyway, so think of a quasi-governmental body, in a lot of cases, within a city government, as we vote for the government, we vote for the city government. However, the city government then turns around and creates or allows the creation of another organization that we did not elect, but they vest this other organization, give this other organization city powers. And in the New London, Connecticut case, you'll see how this is a big deal. So, quasi-governmental organizations not elected have delegated powers from the city government. Okay, so there are two major theories of how politics gets done in city government. So cities are unique things. Cities are governmental agencies, or governments that are situated in a small geographic area, right? There are people that live there, generally, but except for annexation power, cities can't get up and move to another place. Why is this important? Because a city depends upon people living there to bring in tax revenue, to provide services, things like that. If the city cannot entice the correct types of people to build businesses, to live in the city so they can be taxed, the city is going to have a hard time providing services for the population. And there's been this acknowledgement that there are within local governments some people who have a lot more power than their numbers would suggest. And these are some attempts to explain that and explain how decisions get made. And it ties in with these quasi-governmental organizations because they're often created or these quasi-governmental organizations are often outcomes of these two different theories of urban politics. Now, when I say theories, I mean a model, an explanation of the way something works. I'll give this explanation with the New London case, the example I've been alluding to. Anyway, the two theories we're looking at, urban growth machine and systemic power. Okay? So the one fact going into it, cities can't get up and move around except for the annexation power, but they can't. Greensboro can't move to Atlanta, for example, and say, I'm establishing roots here. Another fact is no city will ever create a job. Okay? You cannot elect a city council person who will enact a policy that creates a job. Businesses create jobs. What cities are doing is they're oftentimes, and this is where these theories come into play, competing with each other to attract the jobs that are created. So, since Obama was elected, we have netted 8 million jobs created. There have been a net of 8 million jobs that have been created in this country. That is the number of jobs we lost during the recession, so now we're back to square one, 2008-ish, 2007-ish. Anyway, those 8 million jobs were not created, were not made by any city government. However, they were distributed throughout the country, perhaps based upon what policies a city government enacted, what sort of maybe incentives the government gave the business to come and set up shop in their city. So city governments can have an effect on the distribution of the jobs. Sometimes the jobs can only go to certain geographic locations, based upon, does it have access to water, airport, railroads, interstate highway systems, things like that. But yeah, city doesn't create jobs. Businesses create jobs anyway. Urban growth machine. Let's talk about that. It's urban theory, urban political theory, again, an explanation of how and why urban politics works. So the idea is we can see the city, the Greensboro council, they will make certain actions or they will do certain things, and then we'll ask, why did they do those things? We will then turn to the theory of urban growth machine and see that model and say, yes, this explains why the city governments acted the way it did, why the city of Greensboro acted the way that it did, and as a model, as a theory, in the science sense, theory, it can predict the future, or at least if it's a good theory, it can predict the future. So we can suggest, or we can say under urban growth machine to be a theory, which it is, it must be able to say, if Walmart, that's my phone. If Walmart comes into the city of Greensboro to set up a shop, Greensboro will react in a certain way, or the city council members will be more than likely to do one thing or another. Okay, theory, long, blah, blah, blah. All right, urban growth machine. The basic idea is the city always needs to grow. Okay, there's the constant need for the city to have an increase in population, an increase in capital investments in the city, that the city, the primary goal of the city, and when we're talking about the city government, the big institutions in the city, are to drive growth in the city. Okay. Now, who are these institutions in the city? Why does why does growth in the city matter? Well, Harvey Moloff says that cities are predominantly controlled, or the people that have the greatest influence in a city are people who are somehow geographically tied to the city. They cannot get up and move if they want to, or it's very difficult for them to get up and move. And so those people who are geographically invested in a city are going to have the most interest in the city, and to maintain their economic positions, they're going to want to drive growth within the city, have more people come to the city so they can have more business, and increase land values and things like that. Who are people that are part of the urban growth machine, who are geographically tied to a city? Newspapers and universities are two very obvious examples of institutions that are very much a part of this urban growth machine. So GTCC, it builds satellite campuses, but its main campus is not leaving Jamestown, at least anytime soon. If it were to leave Jamestown, it would cost a lot of money and be kind of crazy and a huge upheaval. But it's not leaving. GTCC has a vested interest in ensuring that Jamestown, Greensboro, High Point, all these areas continue to grow, continue to increase in population, increase in capital investment, and businesses investing in the area. So they're going to promote, quote unquote, pro-growth policies, policies that, try and keep this machine of growth going, sort of regardless of the consequences. Just, bring in people, bring in money as much as you can, keep the motor running. We don't want the city to stall out or to go down, because GTCC, if there's a recession in Greensboro, if things start to slow down in Greensboro, GTCC can't move, right, to avoid it. Now, Walmart can close stores if Greensboro starts becoming an unattractive market. They can close a store. Honda Jet built a plant in Greensboro. If Greensboro, for some reason, becomes an unattractive place to have such a facility, Honda Jet can leave. It's a little harder probably for Honda Jet to leave, because I assume they invested a lot of money, but I guess it depends on a percentage. If it's, only 1% or less, it might be easy for them to leave. But we'll look at a organization that leaves, and a couple of actually that leave. But a university can't leave. A newspaper cannot leave. The New York Times, if New York starts to go down the tubes, New York Times can't up and leave New York and maintain its organization in any sense. So they're going to be committed to promoting a growth strategy within the city. Detroit, as sad as it is to always talk about the terribleness that is Detroit right now, Detroit's a good example. There's Detroit Free Press, I think, is the main paper up there. Detroit News. Maybe it's not Free Press. Well, Detroit Free Press is certainly an thing. It's a Gannett company. Maybe it's, at the very least, probably one of the main newspapers. Anyway, you can probably maybe imagine that the ability of Detroit's newspaper, the Detroit Free Press, to make a profit, to provide any sort of influence in the region, they are very much tied to the geographic area of Detroit and how well that area is doing economically, population-wise. Within the city limits of Detroit, things are pretty terrible. Newspaper, Detroit Free Press, in the city, won't be doing as well. If Detroit was growing, at least in the city limits, things would be good. I make that distinction, and this is very important. Detroit, the city of Detroit, is a cluster of terribleness. However, the Detroit metropolitan region actually is doing fairly well. The city of Detroit, bankruptcy, but because of the suburbs and the cities outlining Detroit that Detroit couldn't annex, all the people left, and then Detroit couldn't capture those people again for tax base. Those areas are still, doing nice. Rich people live out there. It's really nice and pretty. But Detroit, they just left poor people behind in Detroit, and it's sad. Anyway, Detroit newspaper can't leave. If Detroit goes down, the paper goes down. So they have a vested interest, and they're going to be very, very involved in local politics. And as they try and create growth, they're going to be involved in, making that growth, pushing growth strategies. Same with the university, other elites, people that are involved in this, CPAs. For some reason, CPAs and lawyers are mentioned. It's hard for a lawyer to move for some reason, but I guess it depends on the lawyer. Real estate agents, real big in Urban Growth Machine, and Urban Growth Machine looks at them to explain why policies get enacted. Under Urban Growth Machine, as I said, it pursues growth at all costs. Oftentimes, they will talk about growth as a social justice issue. When the economy grows, it's good for everybody. If more people are coming into the city and we're increasing land value, that means that it's more tax revenue for the city, and therefore it's good because that means the city can provide more services. That's an explanation. While it can be true, it's not necessarily always true. But that's part of some of the thought of Urban Growth Machine. I hope I have this. So think of Urban Growth Machine as people or businesses that are tied to a specific geographic region within a city. In order for them to maintain their power, their influence, their economic well-being, they need that city to do well. So they're going to be very involved in politics, have a lot of influence over politics because they're going to be grabbing that power to make sure things happen that promote growth so they can continue their economic growth, their individual economic growth. And they'll be looking out kind of for themselves. Even if that pushes certain people out. So gentrification can sometimes be an example of Urban Growth Machine. It's a social justice issue, they'll say, but it doesn't do them any good if only poor people move into the city because they can't buy the products. They want rich people. So anyway, the other theory, this is a separate theory now. This is a different model for as an explanation for the way urban politics works. Okay, so Urban Growth Machine says when the city of Greensboro does this, Urban Growth Machine will say, well, it did this because of these reasons. it's trying to achieve this goal. If X happens, urban growth machine will then say Y will happen, because that's the model, the way the city government works and the city politics, urban politics work. Systemic power was thought up by Clarence Stone. It's a different theory, so it has a different model of the world. These are also, biases. People will have their, or at least the way we have been using the word, bias of viewing the world through a systemic power lens or an urban growth machine lens. Anyway, Clarence Stone, he looked at urban politics and was like, there are overwhelming majority of people here that want one thing, and a minority of people here that want a different thing. The minority people seem to have an extreme amount of control over local politics that's not representative of their electoral power. Electoral power meaning the number of people they have, their voting capabilities. Why? Why does this minority of people, which then he identifies as being the rich and powerful, why do they have a bigger influence over city governments than the majority of people, when you would, let's say, think we live in a democracy or some sort of representative government where the majority would be represented, and the city council would want to do what the majority of the people in the city want them to do, because then they would get reelected and they're sent there by the majority of people to do a certain thing, but then when they get there they do something a minority of the people want. Why is that? Why does that happen? Clarence Stone explains this with his theory of systemic power. He talks about essentially cities need resources to exist. Kind of overlap, think a little bit with urban growth machine, but different causal relations. Cities need resources to exist. They need and to perform their functions. They need money, they need a tax base, a wealthy tax base. They need businesses to build things in the city so they can tax them, things like that. Now, under Stone's systemic power, here's one really important facet of that. He says power is inherent within the system. Elite people, rich people, have power not necessarily because they run around and they say, hey, look at me, I have power, I'm rich, do what I want you to do. The power can and often is unspoken. Rich people don't need to run around and tell city government officials what they want. The theory here is, the model is that city government officials, once they get elected and once they get within the city government and see like the resources they need, what happens if they drive away certain groups of people, like what happens to the city resources and their ability to provide services to the city, to the city's residents, they will look at that information and then just come to conclusions, bend to the will of the rich and wealthy, those that can move out of the city if they want to, because they need them to stay in the city so that Jesus Christ, so they can perform the services. Again, there's not a conspiracy here at all. Not necessarily. There can be a conspiracy, but there's not a conspiracy here. I we'll see this with the case example also, but what's a good company? I'm Google. And I am going to open up a Google data facility something that will employ 20,000 workers, and they'll all make $100,000 a piece. Greensboro is going to be like, sweet, that's awesome. I'm going to come in, build my facility. When I'm in the planning stages of the facility, if I build the facility, the politicians in Greensboro, without me even maybe needing to say anything, are going to start planning around my facility and anticipate my needs as a large employer with lots of money to make sure I stay there, to stay in Greensboro, and I'm happy that so that they can keep that tax incentive there now, or that tax base there. If the city council has a proposal before them that is supported by the majority of the people, however, the members of the city council also recognize or fear that if it gets enacted, that might cause me to leave, to abandon my plant and move it somewhere else, because I can certainly do that. The city can't move with me, but I can move, I can leave, and I can take all my money and resources with me and my jobs. The city will be more likely to reject the thing that the majority of the people want to appease me, even if I haven't made any demands. And so that's how power can work, often does work within systemic power. It can be direct, but it's also just inherent. This also has a good lesson for us, I think, in terms of racism and sexism, the way we look at it. There's a power that's inherent within it that doesn't need to be explicitly expressed for it to be there. There's privilege that comes with being white and male that you don't need to run around and say, I'm a white male, give me privilege, give me power. It just is sort of like bestowed upon you. Same thing with systemic power and the rich people and the business owners that can leave, but the city council doesn't want them to leave. Okay? There's this sort of marriage there within systemic power also. I don't necessarily mean to suggest that the city government is wholly without any sway or influence. The businesses have a lot of what the city needs, money, resources, things like that. But the city has things the business needs too. Perhaps a well-funded education system to be able to develop new workers into the business. Good roads to move products or move workers in and out. High quality internet service today, you may need something like that. Water and electricity. A business needs water and electricity to survive, and if it doesn't have that, they're going to go somewhere else. So the businesses rely on the city to provide that. But the businesses hold this disproportionate power than their sort of electoral numbers would suggest, because the city is going to be more responsive to their needs and their wants, and even try and anticipate their needs before anybody else's. Who cares if I move out of Winston-Salem? If I move out of Winston-Salem, it's not going to make a dent in anything. I don't bring enough money, enough taxes, enough anything to justify the city doing anything for me at all to make sure I don't leave. However, if I'm I don't know, what's I'm Google again because I can't think of something that's in Winston-Salem. If I'm Google in Winston-Salem and I have 20,000 jobs and maybe am feeling, I haven't expressed it to anyone, but it's obvious that I need some things that I'm not getting, and so maybe I'm thinking about moving to Greensboro because they could provide the facilities I need. Winston-Salem's going to say, don't worry, we're on it. We're going to provide whatever you need to stay here. We're going to provide you the resources and develop the land around you to make this place a happy home for you forever so you can give us your tax money. That's systemic power in a very long way to explain that stuff. So where are we in urban America today? A brief overview. Urban populations are declining within city centers in general. We have seen a small uptick in the past, say, almost decade-ish, as there's been more plans, attempts to move people back into the city, and people get more interested again in living in the center city as opposed to living out in the suburbs. But in general, there's this declining population. It's going to take a lot for urban areas to make up the population they lost. There's decreasing land values within the city, which means decreasing taxes. There's a lot more poverty also that comes with the decreasing land values often. But an increase in poverty means an increase in services, but a decrease in land value means less taxes. So you have the city needing to provide more resources for the people, but having less money to do it. And it's a vicious cycle where the city needs to provide more things to people who are in need, can't meet that need, so more people leave. People that can leave the city leave because the city is not doing a good job providing stuff because they don't have enough resources, which means there's an even smaller and more concentrated amount of poor people. Poverty gets more concentrated, becomes a greater percentage of the city's population, which means the need increases more and the tax revenues decrease, and you again say this vicious cycle where things kind of suck. So a lot of the problems in modern American urban landscape today are consequences not of economics, but of government policy and racism. I'll talk about that. There is some global competition issues and globalization changing the urban environment where with increased connectivity we don't and the ability to make things like, for example, to make shoes in China instead of in the middle of Boston. That drastically affects the makeup and look of a city and how things are run. Hit the pause button. I will, not you. I'm going to look at this phone call and do my switch over my laundry, and I'll be back to talk at this some more.